later today.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the A66 Northern Trans-Pennine project from Penrith to Scotch Corner. This £1 billion investment will improve safety and congestion and help to level up our region, supporting jobs, essential services and tourism. But we have to get the project right. Will my right honourable friend ask his government departments for Transport, the Ministry of Defence and DEFRA to work together pragmatically and reasonably with suggested route amendments to ensure local communities such as Walcott, Musgrave and Sandford are not left blighted by these current plans?
Mr. Speaker, he's right that the development that he refers to is part of an infrastructure revolution I think will transform the country, but he's also right that we should consider local feedback from stakeholders and the community when finalising the design, and so we will.
Unfortunately, the Leader of the Opposition is isolating, so I'm calling Ed Miliband to ask the question on behalf of the Opposition. Ed Miliband.
Thank you. Just like the old day.
Just to say, I presume you all want to get onto the budget, because all you're doing is delaying it. Ed Miliband.
I just want to reassure both sides of the House it's one time only that I'm back. Mr. Speaker, we all need the vital COP26 summit in Glasgow to deliver next week, because failing to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees will have devastating consequences for our planet, and that is shared across this House. Does the Prime Minister agree that to keep that goal of 1.5 degrees alive, we need to roughly halve global emissions in this decisive decade?
Well, I welcome the right honourable gentleman to his place, and indeed, I think the whole House will extend our sympathies to the Leader of the Opposition. I hope he returns soon. It is, of course, correct, Mr. Speaker, that COP26 is both unbelievably important for our planet, but also very difficult, and it's in the balance. Mr. Speaker, and he's right in what he says about the need to keep 1.5 degrees alive, and that will be, and it does depend on what happens this decade. It depends on the commitments that are made. All I will say, Mr. Speaker, is that already very substantial commitments under the UK presidency designate of COP have been achieved, and we've moved from only, he knows it's already a criminal offence, and I know that the Home Secretary, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has asked the police to update her on exactly what details they have of what is happening. She wants to give them the space for the time being to conduct their inquiries into what's going on, but I would ask everybody with information about such incidents to come forward and contact their local police.
Morris.
With COP26 being imminent, I would like to draw attention to what good work's being done in Morecambe with the Eden project. Wes Johnson at Morecambe and Lancaster College has put forward a programme to teach youngsters in Morecambe the international Eden ethos to, shall we say, propagate the goodwill around the world. I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to come to Morecambe and come to the Morecambe Riviera to see the Eden project site at the earliest convenience. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to respond in the affirmative, but to my honourable friend, because I think the last time he asked me about this, it was to ensure that we got an Eden project in Morecambe. So it sounds from what he's saying as though we're making progress in that direction, and that is thrilling.
Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will want to send my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, our best wishes. And it's also good, Mr. Speaker, to see a few more Conservative MPs heeding the Health Secretary's plea and wearing masks in this chamber. But given we have had for several weeks now COVID infection, hospitalisation and death rates far, far higher than any other Western European country, was it a mistake to abandon all those precautions back in July? And if not, why are our figures so bad?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, but the reality is that, of course, we monitor all the data very carefully every day, but we see nothing to suggest that we need to deviate from the plan that we've set out that began with the roadmap in February and that we are sticking to, that has given business and given this country to get on and achieve the unlockings that we've seen and indeed the fastest economic growth in the G7.
Jane Hunt.
Speaker, my Loughborough constituent Sophia Dady has composed a song about the positive action we can each take to combat climate change, which emphasises the need to clean, repair and protect. Will the Prime Minister join me in encouraging all UK schools to follow the lead of Fairfield Prep School in Loughborough and other schools across the world from Hawaii to Norway in raising awareness of this important issue through learning the song?
Well, yes, Mr. Speaker. Do I have to learn the song? I'll do my best, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my honourable friend for raising the work of her constituents and her constituent school. And it is absolutely vital that we not only recycle where it's sensible, but above all, we cut down on the use of plastics, Mr. Speaker.
Sarah Sultana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week it was revealed that fossil fuel companies, interest groups and climate denialists have donated £1.3 million to the Conservative Party and its MPs since 2019. So a simple question, no waffling or dodging the issue. On the eve of COP26, will the Prime Minister demonstrate that he is serious about tackling the climate emergency by paying back this money and pledging that his party will never again take money and donations from the fossil fuel companies that are burning our planet? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, all our donations are registered in the normal way, and I just remind her that the Labour Party's paymasters, the GMB, think Labour's policies mean that no families would have only to take one flight every 5 years, Mr. Speaker, and have their cars confiscated.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week it's UK Wind Week, and later this afternoon I'll be welcoming some young people from my constituency who see their futures in the renewable energy sector, which has done so much to level up the Grimsby, Cleethorpes and North East Lincolnshire. Will the Prime Minister give an assurance that the government will continue to invest in the skills and development of our young people to benefit the regional renewable energy sector?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I think the whole House should be proud of the fact that the UK now produces more offshore wind, still produces more offshore wind than not hot air, Mr. Speaker, but energy for the people of this country. Clean, green energy produced off Cleethorpes, in the North Sea, and we're massively going to be increasing the volume of that output, Mr. Speaker.
Stephen Kinnock.
Mr. Speaker, a thriving steel industry is the foundation of a more productive and resilient Britain. Yet bickering between the Chancellor and the Business Secretary is blocking the chance to tackle the sky-high energy prices that our steelmakers have been facing since long before the current price spikes. With the pathway to net zero dependent on steel firms using more electricity, not less, will he urge his colleagues around the Cabinet table to now put in place a wholesale energy price cap, along with long overdue reductions in network connection costs? Mr. Speaker, COP won't work without a cap.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he's making a very important point about the high energy costs for energy-intensive industries, and that's why we've abated them with about £2 billion since 2013. But the answer is to do what we're doing to make up the long-term baseload needs of this economy by investing in nuclear, which I'm afraid Labour failed to do in their 13 lost years, Mr. Speaker, as well as in renewables.
Prime Minister's questions.
Order! Order! Before I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make his budget statement, it is my duty to take the unusual step of saying a few words. As Chairman of Ways and Means, as the House knows, I chair and have responsibility for the House's proceedings on the budget. I share the concern of many members of this House about the apparent pre-briefing of budget material to the media before any announcements had been made in this House. I understand the Chancellor's position, and it's well understood that for a number of years, elements of the budget have been pre-briefed to the media in an embargoed basis to aid their coverage of it. But such pre-briefing, where the embargo makes clear that the material can be used only after the Chancellor has addressed this House, is rather different to what we have apparently experienced this year. That is, the briefing to the media of details of the budget statement to be published before the statement is delivered. As Mr. Speaker has said, and all ministers know, important policy announcements should be made first to Parliament. Given there shouldn't be shouts of resign over there, that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about courtesy to this House. Given my responsibilities to the House with regard to the budget, I must put on record my support for Mr. Speaker's stance on this issue and express a firm hope, which I believe is felt on all sides of the House, that we do not find ourselves in this position again at future budgets. But, Chancellor, we are all very much looking forward to hearing the remainder of your announcements, which you're about to make to us. I would like to know... Oh, no, you haven't. The Chancellor has still to give us the important parts of his budget. I remind honourable members that copies of the budget resolutions will be available from the Vote Office and Members' Lobby after the Chancellor's statement and, of course, online. I also remind honourable members we will have good behaviour over this next hour or so. Interventions are not taken during the Chancellor's statement, nor indeed during the replies on behalf of the opposition and the SNP. So we'll put aside all of those matters that we have just addressed and now concentrate. I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make his budget statement.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've heard your words and those of Mr. Speaker. I have the greatest respect for you both, and I want to assure you that I have listened very carefully to what you have said. And may I also, Madam Deputy Speaker, send my best wishes to the Leader of the Opposition, and I know the whole House will join me in doing that. And now, with your permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me turn to today's budget. Madam Deputy Speaker, employment is up, investment is growing, public services are improving, the public finances are stabilising, and wages are rising. Today's budget delivers a stronger economy for the British people, stronger growth with the UK recovering faster than our major competitors, stronger public finances with our debt under control, stronger employment with fewer people out of work and more people in work. Growth up, jobs up and debt down. Let there be no doubt our plan is working. Madam Deputy Speaker, this budget is about what this government is about. Investment in a more innovative, high-skilled economy, because that is the only sustainable path to individual prosperity. World-class public services, because these are the common goods from which we all benefit. Backing business, because our future cannot be built by government alone, but must come from the imagination and drive of our entrepreneurs. Help for working families with the cost of living, because we will always give people the support they need and the tools to build a better life for themselves. And levelling up, because for too long, far too long, The location of your birth has determined too much of your future, because the awesome power of opportunity shouldn't be available only to a wealthy few, but be the birthright of every child in an independent and prosperous United Kingdom. Madam Deputy Speaker, today's budget does not draw a line under COVID. We have challenging months ahead. And let me encourage everyone eligible to get their booster jabs as soon as possible. But today's budget does begin the work of preparing for a new economy post-COVID. The Prime Minister's economy of higher wages, higher skills and rising productivity, of strong public services, vibrant communities and safer streets, an economy fit for a new age of optimism, where the only limit to our potential is the effort we are prepared to put in and the sacrifices we are prepared to make. That is the stronger economy of the future, and this budget is the foundation. Madam Deputy Speaker, the House will recognise the challenging backdrop of rising inflation. Let me begin by carefully explaining what is happening in our economy and why. Inflation in September was 3.1% and is likely to rise further, with the OBR expecting CPI to average 4% over the next year. The majority of this rise in inflation can be explained by two global forces. First, as economies around the world reopen, demand for goods has increased more quickly than supply chains can meet. Having been shut down for almost a year, it takes time for factories to scale up production, for container ships to move goods to where demand is, for businesses to hire the people they need. And second, global demand for energy has surged at a time when supplies have already been disrupted, putting a strain on prices. In the year to September, the global wholesale price of oil, coal and gas combined has more than doubled. The pressures caused by supply chains and energy prices will take months to ease. It would be irresponsible for anyone to pretend that we can solve this overnight. I am in regular communication with finance ministers around the world, and it's clear these are shared global problems, neither unique to the UK nor possible for us to address on our own. But where the government can ease these pressures, we will act. To address the driver shortage, the Transport Secretary is introducing temporary visas, tackling testing backlogs, changing cabotage requirements, and is today announcing new funding to improve lorry park facilities. We've already suspended the HGV levy until August, and I can do more today, extending it for a further year until 2023 and freezing vehicle excise duty for heavy goods vehicles. To help with the cost of living, we've introduced a new £500 million household support fund, and today's budget will support working families further. And in terms of our fiscal policy, we are going to meet our commitments on public services and capital investment, but we are going to do so keeping in mind the need to control inflation. And finally, I have written to the Governor of the Bank of England today to reaffirm their remit to achieve low and stable inflation. And people should be reassured they have a strong track record in doing so. I understand people are concerned about global inflation, but they have a government here at home ready and willing to act. And Madam Deputy Speaker, in a period of global uncertainty, you need to work hard to maintain a strong economy and be responsible with the public finances, and that is what we are doing. I'm grateful to the OBR for their work, and I'm pleased to say they now expect our recovery to be quicker. Thanks to this government's actions, they forecast the economy to return to its pre-COVID level at the turn of the year, earlier than they thought in March. Growth this year is revised up from 4 to 6.5%. The OBR then expect the economy to grow by 6% in 2022 and 2.1%, 1.3% and 1.6% over the next 3 years. In July last year, at the height of the pandemic, unemployment was expected to peak at 12%. Today, the OBR expect unemployment to peak at just 5.2%. That means over 2 million fewer people out of work than previously feared. And wages are rising. Compared to February 2020, they have grown in real terms by almost 3.5%. And I can confirm for the House the OBR's forecast for business investment has been revised up over the next 5 years. And because of the actions we took to support our economy, we have been more successful than previously feared in preventing the long-term economic damage of COVID. The OBR have today revised down their scarring assumption from 3% to 2%. In the depths of the worst economic crisis on record, we set out a plan for jobs, a plan that was backed by business groups and trade bodies, a plan that has helped millions of people and saved millions of jobs, a plan that the OBR have today described as remarkably successful. Madam Deputy Speaker, today's forecast confirm beyond doubt our plan for jobs is working. And Madam Deputy Speaker, disruption in the global economy highlights the importance of strong public finances. Coronavirus left us with borrowing higher than at any time since the Second World War. As the Prime Minister reminded us in his conference speech, higher borrowing today is just higher interest rates and even higher taxes tomorrow. So we need to strengthen our public finances so that when the next crisis comes, we have the fiscal space to act. Today, I am publishing a new Charter for Budget Responsibility. The Charter sets out 2 fiscal rules which will keep this government on the path of discipline and responsibility. First, underlying public sector net debt, excluding the impact of the Bank of England, must, as a percentage of GDP, be falling. Second, in normal times, the state should only borrow to invest in our future growth and prosperity. Everyday spending must be paid through taxation. Both rules must be met by the 3rd year of every forecast period, giving us the flexibility to respond to crises while credibly keeping our public finances under control. These rules are supplemented by targets to spend up to 3% of GDP on capital investment and keep welfare spending on a sustainable path. Madam Deputy Speaker, the House will be asked to vote on our Charter, giving members a simple choice: to abandon our fiscal anchor and leave our economy adrift with reckless, unfunded pledges, or to vote for what we on this side of the House know is the right course: sound public finances and a stronger economy for the British people. Madam Deputy Speaker, important as the Charter is, our credibility comes as much from what we do as what we say. So I'm pleased to tell the House that because our plan is delivering a stronger economy, and because we've taken tough but responsible decisions on public finances, the OBR report today that all our fiscal rules have been met. Underlying debt is forecast to be 85.2% of GDP this year, then 85.4% of GDP in 22-23, before peaking at 85.7% in 23-24. It then falls in the final 3 years of the forecast from 85.1% to 83.3%. Borrowing as a percentage of GDP is forecast to fall in every single year, from 7.9% this year to 3.3% next, then 2.4%, 1.7%, 1.7% and 1.5% in the following years. Borrowing down, debt down, proving once again it is the Conservatives and only the Conservatives who can be trusted with taxpayers' money. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have made 4 fiscal judgments in this budget. First, we will meet our fiscal rules with a margin to protect ourselves against economic risks. That is the responsible decision at a time of increasing global economic uncertainty, when our public finances are twice as sensitive to changes in interest rates as they were before the pandemic, and 6 times as sensitive as they were before the financial crisis. Just a 1 percentage point in inflation and interest rates would cost us around £23 billion. My second judgment today is to continue supporting working families. Third, as well as helping people at home, our improving fiscal situation means we will meet our obligations to the world's poorest. I told the House that we met our fiscal tests, we would return to spending 0.7% of our national income on overseas aid. Some people said this was a trick or a device. I told this House it was no such thing, and based on the tests I set out, today's forecasts show that we are, in fact, scheduled to return to 0.7 in 24-25 before the end of this Parliament. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, my fourth fiscal judgment is this. Today's budget increases total departmental spending over this Parliament by £150 billion. That's the largest increase this century, with spending growing by 3.8% a year in real terms. As a result of this spending review, and contrary to speculation, there will be a real terms rise in overall spending for every single department, and public sector net investment as a share of GDP will be at the highest sustained level for nearly half a century. If anybody still doubts it, today's budget confirms the Conservatives are the real party of public services. Madam Deputy Speaker, our stronger economy lays the foundation for everything we want to achieve in today's budget. World-class public services and more investment in our future growth. Before I turn to the details, I'd like to thank my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary. Yeah. Completing the spending review in such challenging circumstances was a tall order, and thankfully we had just the man for the job. Madam Deputy Speaker, at the start of this Parliament, resource spending on healthcare was £133 billion. Today's spending review confirms that by the end of this Parliament it will increase by £44 billion to over £177 billion. And the extra revenue we're forecast to raise from the Health and Social Care Levy is going direct to the NHS and social care as promised. The health capital budget will be the largest since 2010. Record investment in health R&D, including better newborn screening, as campaigned for by the member for the cities of London and Westminster. 40 new hospitals, 70 hospital upgrades, more operating theatres to tackle the backlog, and 100 community diagnostic centres. All staffed by a bigger, better-trained workforce with 50,000 more nurses and 50 million more primary care appointments. As well as funding to deliver the Prime Minister's historic reforms to social care, we're providing local government with new grant funding over the next 3 years of £4.8 billion, the largest increase in core funding for over a decade. And we're investing more in housing and home ownership too, with a multi-year housing settlement totalling nearly £24 billion. £11.5 billion to build up to the 180,000 new affordable homes, the largest cash investment in a decade, 20% larger than the previous programme. And we're investing an extra £1.8 billion, enough to bring 1,500 hectares of brownfield land into use, meet our commitment to invest £10 billion in new housing, and unlock 1 million new homes. We're also confirming £5 billion to remove unsafe cladding from the highest risk buildings, partly funded by the Residential Property Developers Tax, which I can confirm will be levied on developers with profits over £25 million at a rate of 4%. And we've also reduced rough sleeping by over a third, but we will go further, with £640 million a year for rough sleeping and homelessness, an 85% increase in funding compared to 2019. Madam Deputy Speaker, today's budget funds our ambition to recruit 20,000 new police officers, provides an extra £2.2 billion for courts, prisons and probation services, including £500 million to reduce the courts' backlog, pays for programmes to tackle neighbourhood crime, reoffending, county lines, violence against women and girls, victim services and improved responses to rape cases. And over the next 3 years commits £3.8 billion to the largest prison building programme in a generation. Madam Deputy Speaker, all governments should aspire to provide greater life chances for future generations. But few governments can match our ambition. So let me now turn to what this budget does to support children. The evidence is compelling that the first 1,001 days of a child's life are the most important. My right honourable friend, the member for South Northamptonshire, has recognised this with her inspirational report. And we are responding today with £300 million for a Start for Life offer for families, high-quality parenting programmes, tailored services to help with perinatal mental health. And I'm pleased to tell the member for Congleton funding to create a network of family hubs around the country too, to improve the quality of childcare. We're going to pay providers more, with today's spending review providing an extra £170 million by 24-25. We're confirming £150 million to support training and development for the entire early years workforce, to help up to 300,000 more families facing multiple needs. We're investing an extra £200 million in the Supporting Families programme, and we will provide over £200 million a year to continue the Holiday Activity and Food programme. Today's spending review also delivers our commitment to schools, with an extra £4.7 billion by 24-25, which, combined with the ambitious plans we announced at the spending review of 2019, will restore per-pupil funding to 2010 levels in real terms, equivalent to a cash increase for every pupil of more than £1,500. And for children with special educational needs and disabilities, we are more than tripling the amount we invest to create 30,000 new school places. And we know that the pandemic caused significant disruption to children's learning. We've already announced £3.1 billion to help education recovery. Today, as promised by the Prime Minister and the Education Secretary, we will go further with just under £2 billion of new funding to help schools and colleges, bringing this government's total support for education recovery to almost £5 billion. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we level up public services, we are also levelling up communities, restoring the pride people feel in the places they call home. To do that, we're providing £560 million for youth services, enough to fund up to 300 youth clubs across the country, over £200 million to build or transform 8,000 state-of-the-art community football pitches across the UK, funding to turn over 100 areas of derelict land into new pocket parks, and I'm allocating the first round of bids from the Levelling Up Fund. £1.7 billion to invest in the infrastructure of everyday life in over 100 local areas, with £170 million in Scotland, 120 million in Wales and 50 million in Northern Ireland, more than their Barnett shares. This will benefit the whole United Kingdom. We are backing projects in Aberdeen, Bury, Burnley, Lewes, Clwyd South, and not one, not two, but 3 successful projects for the great city of Stoke-on-Trent. But that's not all. We're also going to fund projects in Ashton-under-Lyne, South Leicester, Sunderland, Doncaster, and West Leeds. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are so committed to levelling up, we are even levelling up the opposition front bench. Madam Deputy Speaker, levelling up is also about protecting our unique culture and heritage. The British Museum, Tate Liverpool, the York Railway Museum, we're investing £800 million to protect museums, galleries, libraries and local culture. And thanks to the Culture Secretary, over 100 regional museums and libraries will be renovated, restored and revived. And she secured up to £2 million to start work on a new Beatles attraction on the Liverpool waterfront. We're also going to review our museum freedoms and make our creative tax reliefs more generous. On current plans, the tax relief for museums and galleries is due to end in March next year, just as exhibitions are starting to tour again. So I've decided to extend it for 2 years to March 2024. And to support theatres, orchestras, museums and galleries to recover from COVID, the tax reliefs for all those sectors from today until April 2023 will be doubled. And they won't return to the normal rate until April 2024. That's a tax relief for culture worth almost £250 million. And Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a budget for the whole United Kingdom. Through the Barnett formula, today's decisions increase Scottish Government funding in each year by an average of £4.6 billion. Welsh Government funding by £2.5 billion and £1.6 billion for the Northern Ireland Executive. This delivers, in real terms, the largest block grants for the devolved administration since the devolution settlements of 1998. The whole of the United Kingdom will benefit from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and over time we will ramp up funding so that total domestic UK-wide funding will match EU receipts, averaging around £1.5 billion a year. And we will fund projects across the UK, including funding for the Extreme E race in Scotland, the 22 Hebrides X-Prix, accelerating funding for the Cardiff City Region deal in Wales, and funding in Northern Ireland for community cohesion. And whilst today demonstrates the indisputable fiscal benefit of being part of the United Kingdom, this is and always will be secondary to the simple truth that we are bound together by more than transactional benefit. It is our collective history, our culture and our security. We are and always will be one family, one United Kingdom. Madam Deputy Speaker, whilst today's budget delivers historically high levels of public spending, its success will be measured not by the billions we spend, but by the outcomes we achieve and the difference we make to people's lives. The budgets are set, the plans are in place, the task is clear. Now we must deliver, because this isn't the government's money, it's taxpayers' money. Madam Deputy Speaker, our stronger economy allows us to fund world-class public services, the people's priority. But over the long term, the only way to pay for higher spending is economic growth. And if we want to see higher growth, we've got to tackle the problem that's been holding back this country for far too long: our uneven economic geography. As we come out of the worst economic shock we've ever seen, we've got a choice: to retrench or to invest. This government chooses to invest. To invest in our economic infrastructure, to invest in innovation, to invest in skills, to invest in a plan for growth that builds a stronger economy for the future. That's what this budget is about, and that's what this government is about. Madam Deputy Speaker, infrastructure connects our country, drives productivity, and levels up. That's why our national infrastructure strategy invests in economic infrastructure like roads, railways, broadband and mobile, over £130 billion. To connect our towns and cities, we're investing £21 billion on roads and £46 billion on railways. Our integrated rail plan will be published soon, dramatically improving journey times between our towns and cities. And today, we're providing £5.7 billion for London-style transport settlements in Greater Manchester, the Liverpool City region, the Tees Valley, South Yorkshire, West Midlands and the West of England. And we're helping local transport everywhere, with £2.6 billion for a long-term pipeline of over 50 local roads upgrades, over £5 billion for local roads maintenance, enough to fill 1 million more potholes a year, and funding for buses, cycling and walking, totalling more than £5 billion. The Prime Minister promised an infrastructure revolution. This budget delivers an infrastructure revolution. Madam Deputy Speaker, investment in our infrastructure is just the first step. We need to do what the people of this country have always done: invent, discover and create the ideas and technologies that will change the world. So we will also invest more in innovation. The UK is already a world leader. With less than 1% of the world's population, we have 4 of the world's top 20 universities, 14% of the world's most impactful research, and the second most Nobel laureates. We want to go further. I can confirm we will maintain our target to increase R&D investment to £22 billion. But in order to get there and deliver on our other priorities, we'll reach the target in 26-27, spending by the end of this Parliament £20 billion a year on R&D. That's a cash increase of 50%, the fastest increase ever. And I can confirm for the House that this £20 billion is in addition to the cost of our R&D tax reliefs. Combined with those tax reliefs, total public investment in R&D is increasing from 0.7% of GDP in 2018 to 1.1% of GDP by the end of the Parliament. How does 1.1% compare internationally? Well, the latest available data shows an OECD average of just 0.7%. Germany investing 0.9%, France 1%, and the United States just 0.7%. This unprecedented funding will increase core science funding to £5.9 billion per year by 24-25, a cash increase of 37%. Meet the full cost of associating with Horizon Europe. Establish the new Advanced Research and Invention Agency with £800 million by 25-26, and strengthen our focus on late-stage innovation, increasing Innovate UK's annual core budget to £1 billion, double what it was at the start of this Parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, there's more to becoming a science superpower than just what the government spends on R&D. Our ambitious net zero strategy is also an innovation strategy, investing £30 billion to create the new green industries of the future. We've just issued our second green bond, making us the 3rd largest issuer of sovereign green bonds anywhere in the world. London last week was named the best place in the world for green finance, and on Monday, the new UK Infrastructure Bank announced its first ever investment, £107 million to support offshore wind in Teesside. And to build on this work, 1 week today, I'll be hosting global finance ministers and businesses at COP26. And Madam Deputy Speaker, innovation comes from the imagination, drive and risk-taking of business. That's why we've launched Help to Grow for turbocharged SME productivity, started a new co-investment venture capital fund, Future Fund Breakthrough. It's why I'm announcing today we will consult on further changes to the regulatory charge cap for pension schemes, unlocking institutional investment whilst protecting savers. It's why we're introducing a new £1.4 billion Global Britain Investment Fund, supporting transformative economic activity and our world-leading sectors like life sciences. And it's why today's budget increases the British Business Bank's regional financing programmes to £1.6 billion, expanding their coverage and helping innovative businesses get access to the finance they need across the whole United Kingdom. Madam Deputy Speaker, a third of our science Nobel laureates have been immigrants. Half of our fastest-growing companies have a foreign-born founder. So an economy built on innovation must be open and attractive to the best and brightest minds. Thanks to our brilliant Home Secretary, today's budget confirms the eligibility criteria for our new scale-up visa, making it quicker and easier for the fast-growing businesses to bring in highly skilled individuals. And the Trade Secretary's new Global Talent Network, launching initially in the Bay Area, Boston and Bangalore, will identify, attract and relocate the best global talent in science and tech sectors, all part of our plan to make our visa system for international talent the most competitive in the world. Madam Deputy Speaker, if we want greater private sector innovation, we need to make our research and development tax reliefs fit for purpose. The latest figures show the UK has the second highest spending on R&D tax reliefs in the OECD, yet it's not working as well as it should. UK business investment in R&D is less than half the OECD average. We've reviewed the reliefs and identified two issues we are solving today. First, the reliefs need to reflect how businesses conduct research in the modern world. So, as many companies have called for, I'm expanding the scope of the reliefs to include cloud computing and data costs. The second problem is this. Companies claimed UK tax relief on £48 billion of R&D spending. Yet UK business investment was around half of that, at just £26 billion. We are subsidising billions of pounds of R&D that isn't even happening here in the United Kingdom. That's unfair on British taxpayers, and it puts us out of step with places like Australia, Canada, Hong Kong, Singapore, Switzerland and the USA, who have all focused their R&D tax reliefs on domestic activity. So from April 2023, we are going to do the same and incentivise greater investment here at home. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, £22 billion investment in R&D, the Net Zero Strategy, the Future Fund, Help to Grow, more regional finance, unlocking institutional capital, a more competitive visa system and a modernised R&D tax credits regime. Enough action to prove the hypothesis we are making this country a science and technology superpower. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, as well as investing in infrastructure and innovation, there is one further part of our plan for growth that is crucial: providing a world-class education to all our people. Higher skills lead to higher regional productivity, and higher productivity leads to higher wages. With 80% of the UK's 2030 workforce already in work, our future success depends not just on the schooling we give our children, but the lifelong learning we offer to adults. We've already done a lot. Our plan for jobs invested in apprenticeships, traineeships and the Kickstart scheme, but we need to go further. Today's budget invests in the most wide-ranging skills agenda this country has seen in decades. We are increasing skills spending over the Parliament by £3.8 billion, an increase of 42%. We're expanding T-levels, building institutes of technology, rolling out the Prime Minister's lifetime skills guarantee, upgrading our FE college estate, quadrupling the number of places on skills boot camps, and significantly increasing funding for apprenticeships. We are also going to tackle a tragic fact. Millions of adults in our country have numeracy skills lower than those expected of a 9-year-old. According to the leading charity, National Numeracy, this costs individuals with poor numeracy up to £1,600 a year in lost earnings. People with poor numeracy skills are more than twice as likely to be unemployed as their peers. So today, I can announce a new UK-wide numeracy programme, Multiply. With £560 million, Multiply will improve basic math skills and help to change people's lives across the whole United Kingdom. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're building our infrastructure with new roads, railways and broadband, cementing our status as a science and technology superpower, and strengthening the skills of our people, the country's greatest asset. That is a real plan for growth, and that's how this government is building a stronger economy for the British people. Madam Deputy Speaker, world-class public services are the people's priority. Investment in infrastructure, innovation and skills will create the growth that we need to pay for them. But as Conservatives, we know that government action alone won't be enough to create a stronger economy. We want this country to be the most exciting and dynamic place in the world for business. And now that we've left the EU, we have the freedom to do things differently and deliver a simpler, fairer tax system. I want to begin with one of our smallest taxes, but a tax which plays an important role in one of our preeminent industries, shipping. Now that we've left the EU, today we start reforming our tonnage tax regime to make it simpler and more competitive. And we're also making it fairer for UK taxpayers. When we were in the old EU system, ships in the tonnage tax regime were required to fly the flag of an EU state. But that doesn't make sense for an independent nation, so I can announce today that our tonnage tax will, for the first time ever, reward companies for adopting the UK merchant shipping flag, the red ensign. That is entirely fitting for a country with such a proud maritime history as ours. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am sure the opposition will be delighted that red flags are still flying somewhere in this country, even if they are all at sea. Let me turn now to air passenger duty. Right now, people pay more for return flights with and between the 4 nations of the United Kingdom than they do when flying home from abroad. We used to have a return leg exemption for domestic flights, but were required to remove it in 2001. But today, I can announce that flights between airports in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland will, from April 2023, be subject to a new, lower rate of air passenger duty. This will help cut the cost of living, with 9 million passengers seeing their duty cut by half. It will bring people together across the United Kingdom. And because they tend to have a greater proportion of domestic passengers, it is a boost to regional airports like Aberdeen, Belfast, Inverness and Southampton. Airports are major regional employers. So to help them get through the winter, I'm also extending our support for English airports for a further 6 months. We're also making changes to reduce carbon emissions from aviation. Most emissions come from international rather than domestic aviation, So we are introducing from April 2023 a new ultra-long-haul band in air passenger duty covering flights of over 5,500 miles with an economy rate of £91. Less than 5% of passengers will pay more, but those who fly furthest will pay the most. Madam Deputy Speaker, our approach to corporate taxation strikes a responsible balance between funding public services and encouraging the investment we need for a stronger economy. At the March budget, we took the difficult but necessary decision to increase the rate of corporation tax to 25% from 2023. Still, the lowest rate in the G7 and the fifth lowest rate in the G20. Alongside, I introduced the new super deduction, the biggest business tax cut in modern British history, and extended to the end of this year the annual investment allowance at its higher level of £1 million. Now is not the time to remove tax breaks on investment, so I can confirm today that the £1 million annual investment allowance will not end in December as planned. It will be extended all the way to March 2023. I also said in March that I would review the bank surcharge within corporation tax to maintain the competitiveness of our financial services industry. We will retain a surcharge of 3%. The overall rate for corporation tax on banks will, in 2023, increase from 27% to 28% and will remain higher than the rate paid by other companies. Small challenger banks are improving banking competition, which is good for the sector and good for consumers. So to help them, I will also raise the annual allowance to £100 million. Madam Deputy Speaker, our manifesto promised to review business rates. We're publishing our conclusions today. But before I set out our plans, let me say this. We on this side of the House are clear that reckless, unfunded promises to abolish a tax which raises £25 billion every year are completely irresponsible. It would be wrong to find £25 billion a year in extra borrowing, cuts to public services or tax rises elsewhere. So we will retain business rates, but with key reforms to ease the burden and create stronger high streets. First, we will make the business rate system fairer and timelier, with more frequent revaluations every 3 years. The new revaluation cycle will be delivered from 2023. Second, as called for by the Federation of Small Business and the British Property Federation, we're introducing a new investment relief to encourage businesses to adopt green technologies like solar panels. And I'm announcing today that we'll accept the CBI and the British Retail Consortium's recommendation to introduce a new business rates improvement relief. From 2023, every single business will be able to make property improvements and for 12 months pay no extra business rates. That means a hotel adding extra rooms, a manufacturer expanding their factory, an office adding new air conditioning, CCTV or bike shelters will all pay no extra rates. Together with the new green investment relief, we're introducing investment incentives totalling £750 million. This will make a difference, but without action, millions of businesses would see their tax bills going up next year because of inflation. I want to help those businesses right now. So our third step is that next year's planned increase in the multiplier will be cancelled. That's a tax cut for businesses worth over the next 5 years £4.6 billion. And I have one final measure to help those businesses hardest hit by the pandemic. I'm announcing today, for 1 year, a new 50% business rates discount for businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. Pubs, music venues, cinemas, restaurants, hotels, theatres and gyms. Any eligible business can claim a discount on their bills of 50% up to a maximum of £110,000. That is a business tax cut worth almost £1.7 billion. Together with small business rate relief, this means that over 90% of all retail, hospitality and leisure businesses will see a discount of at least 50%. Apart from the COVID reliefs, this is the biggest single-year tax cut to business rates in over 30 years. Madam Deputy Speaker, taken together, today's budget cuts business rates by £7 billion. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are unleashing the dynamism and creativity of British businesses with a simpler, fairer and more competitive tax system. The biggest business tax cut in modern British history, the biggest single-year tax cut to business rates for 30 years, £1 million investment allowance, tonnage tax reformed, air passenger duty cut. That is the way to back business and build a stronger economy. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me turn now to alcohol duties. First introduced in 1643 to help pay for the Civil War, our alcohol duty system is outdated, complex and full of historical anomalies. The Institute of Fiscal Studies have called it, in their words, a mess. The Institute of Economic Affairs said it defies common sense. And the World Health Organization have warned that countries like the UK, which follow the EU rules, are, and I quote, unable to implement tax systems that are optimal from the perspective of public health. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, today we are taking advantage of leaving the EU to announce the most radical simplification of alcohol duties for over 140 years. We are taking 5 steps today to create a system that is simpler, fairer and healthier. First, to radically simplify the system, we are slashing the number of main duty rates from 15 to just 6. Our new system will be designed around a common sense principle. The stronger the drink, the higher the rate. This means that some drinks, like stronger red wines, fortified wines or high-strength white ciders, will see a small increase in their rates because they are currently undertaxed given their strength. That's the right thing to do, and it will help end the era of cheap, high-strength drinks which can harm public health and enable problem drinking. And because this is a more rational system, the converse is also true. Many lower alcohol drinks are currently overtaxed and have been for many decades. Rosé, fruit ciders, liqueurs, lower strength beers and wines, today's changes mean that they will pay less. The second step I'm taking today will encourage small, innovative craft producers. I'm announcing proposals for a new small producer relief. This will extend the principle of small brewers relief to include, for the first time ever, small cider makers and other producers making alcoholic drinks of less than 8.5%. Third, I'm going to modernise the system to reflect the way that people drink today. Over the last decade, consumption of sparkling wines like Prosecco has doubled. English sparkling wine has increased almost tenfold. It's clear they are no longer the preserve of wealthy elites. And they are no stronger than still wines. So I'm going to end the irrational duty premium of 28% that they currently pay. Sparkling wines, wherever they are produced, will now pay the same duty as still wines of equivalent strength. And because growing conditions in the UK typically favour lower strength and sparkling wines, this means English and Welsh wines, compared with stronger imported wines, will now pay less. Sales of fruit cider have increased from 1 in 1,000 ciders sold in 2005 to 1 in 4 today. But they can pay 2 or 3 times as much duty as cider that is made with apples or pears. So we are cutting the duty on them too. The fourth step I'm taking today will directly support the home of British community life for centuries, our pubs. even before the pandemic, pubs were struggling. Between 2000 and 2019, consumption in the on-trade fell by 40%. And many public health bodies recognise that pubs are often safer drinking environments than being at home. So, as the members for Dudley South and North West Durham will agree, a fairer, healthier system supports pubs. So I can announce today draft relief. Draft relief will apply a new, lower rate of duty on draft beer and cider. It will apply to drinks served from draft containers over 40 litres. It will particularly benefit community pubs who do 75% of their trade on draft. And let me tell the House the new rate. Draft relief will cut duty by 5%. That is the biggest cut to cider duty since 1923. The biggest cut to fruit ciders in a generation. The biggest cut to beer duty for 50 years. This is not temporary. It's a long-term investment in British pubs of £100 million a year and a permanent cut in the cost of a pint of 3p. And I cannot wait, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the opposition to accuse me tomorrow of beer barrel politics. Madam Deputy Speaker, these much-needed reforms will come into effect in February 2023, but I want to help the hospitality industry right now. So, for my final announcement on alcohol duties today, I can confirm that the planned increase in duty on spirits like Scotch whisky, wine, cider and beer will all, from midnight tonight, be cancelled. That's a tax cut worth £3 billion. Madam Deputy Speaker, our reforms make the alcohol duty system simpler, fairer and healthier. They help with the cost of living while tackling problem drinking. They support innovative entrepreneurs and craft producers. They back pubs and public health. And they are only possible because we've left the European Union. Madam Deputy Speaker, world-class public services, investment in infrastructure, innovation and skills, simpler, fairer taxes to support businesses and consumers, all built on the foundation of a stronger economy and responsible public finances. That is our vision for the future, and that is what this budget delivers. And this budget also supports working families. Madam Deputy Speaker, with fuel prices at the highest level in 8 years, I'm not prepared to add to the squeeze on families and small businesses. So I can confirm today the planned rise in fuel duty will be cancelled. That's a saving over the next 5 years of almost £8 billion. Compared to pre-2010 plans, today's freeze means the average tank of fuel will cost around £15 less per car, £30 less for vans, £130 less for HGVs. After 12 consecutive years of frozen rates, the average car driver will now save a total of £1,900. Madam Deputy Speaker, I can also announce today that public sector workers will see fair and affordable pay rises across the whole spending review period as we return to the normal, independent pay-setting process. And I can take action to help the lowest paid as well. It was a Conservative government that introduced the national living wage in 2016. A Conservative government that, according to statistics published just yesterday, has overseen the proportion of people in low-paid work falling to its lowest level since 1997. And it is a Conservative government that is increasing the wage floor again today. The Independent Low Pay Commission brings together economists, business groups and trades unions. The government is accepting their recommendation to increase the national living wage next year by 6.6% to £9.50 an hour. For a full-time worker, that's a pay rise worth over £1,000. It will benefit over 2 million of the lowest paid workers in the country. It's broadly consistent with previous increases and keeps us on track for our target of 2/3 of median earnings by 2024. And it is a major commitment to the high-wage, high-skill, high-productivity economy of the future. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we build this stronger economy, we're doing so at the end of an extraordinary 18 months. COVID wasn't just a public health challenge. It wasn't just an economic challenge. It was a moral challenge too. We had to show that we could pull together as a country, and we did. We had to put aside questions of ideology and orthodoxy to do whatever it took to care for our people and each other, and we did. There's a different kind of moral dimension to the economic challenge we face now. Last year, the state grew to be over half the size of the total economy. Taxes are rising to their highest level as a percentage of GDP since the 1950s. I don't like it, but I cannot apologise for it. It is the result of the unprecedented crisis we faced and the extraordinary action we took in response. But now we have a choice. Do we want to live in a country where the response to every question is what is the government going to do about it? Where every time prices rise, every time a company gets in trouble, every time some new challenge emerges, the answer is always the taxpayer must pay? Or do we choose to recognise that government has limits? Government should have limits. If this seems a controversial statement to make, then I'm all the more glad for saying it, because that means it needed saying, and it is what we believe. There is a reason we talk about the importance of family, community, and personal responsibility, not because these are an alternative to the market or the state. It's because they are more important than the market or the state. The moments that make life worth living aren't created by government, aren't announced by government, aren't granted by government. They come from us as people, our choices, our sacrifices, our efforts. And we believe people should keep more of the rewards of those efforts. Yes, we've taken some corrective action to fund the NHS and get our debt under control. But as we look towards the future, I want to say this simple thing to the House and the British people. My goal is to reduce taxes. By the end of this Parliament, I want taxes to be going down, not up. I want this to be a society that rewards energy, ingenuity and inventiveness, a society that rewards work. That is what we believe on this side of the House. That is my mission over the remainder of this Parliament. And the final announcement in today's budget takes a first step. Madam Deputy Speaker, for many of the lowest paid in society, there is a hidden tax on work. The universal credit taper withdraws support as people work more hours. The rate is currently 63%, so for every £1 someone earns, their universal credit is reduced by 63p. Let us be in no doubt, this is a tax on work, and a high rate of tax at that. Organisations as varied as the Trades Union Congress, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the Resolution Foundation, the Centre for Policy Studies and the Centre for Social Justice have all said it is too high. So, to make sure work pays and help some of the lowest income families in our country keep more of their hard-earned money, I have decided to cut this rate, not by 1%, not by 2%, but by 8%. This is a tax on working people, and we are cutting it from 63 to 55%. The rate originally envisaged by my right honourable friend, the member for Chingford. And because I'm also increasing the work allowances by £500, this is a tax cut next year worth over £2 billion. Nearly 2 million families will keep, on average, an extra £1,000 a year. Changes like this normally take effect at the start of the new tax year in April. But we want to help people right now. So we will introduce this within weeks and no later than December the 1st. Let me tell the House what these changes mean. A single mother of two, renting and working full-time on the national living wage, will be better off by around £1,200. A couple renting a home with their two children, one working full-time, the other working part-time, will be better off every single year by £1,800. This is a £2 billion tax cut for the lowest paid workers in our country. It supports working families, it helps with the cost of living, and it rewards work. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, fuel duty cut, air passenger duty cut, alcohol duty cut, the biggest cut to business rates in 30 years. Growth up, jobs up, wages up, public finances back in a better place, more investment in infrastructure, innovation and skills, a pay rise for over 2 million people and a £2 billion tax cut for the lowest paid. This budget helps with the cost of living. This budget levels up to a higher wage, higher skill, higher productivity economy. This budget builds a stronger economy for the British people, and I commend it to the House.
Thank you. Under Standing Order number 51, the first motion entitled Provisional Collection of Taxes must be decided without debate. Will the Chancellor of the Exchequer please move? They're all getting in the way. Will the Chancellor of the Exchequer please move it formally? The question is that, pursuant to Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968, provisional statutory effect shall be given to the following motions. Returns for disposals of UK land, etc., motion number 19. Diverted profits tax closure notices, etc., motion number 24. Rates of tobacco products duty, motion number 39. And vehicle excise duty exemption for cabotage operations, motion number 41. As mayors that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. So we now come to the motion entitled Income Tax Charge. It is on this motion that the debate will take place today and on succeeding days. The questions on this motion and on the remaining motions will be put at the end of the budget debate on Tuesday, 2nd of November. I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to move the motion formally. The question is that income tax is charged for the tax year 2022 to 23, and it is declared that it is expedient in the public interest that this resolution should have statutory effect under the provisions of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968. I would normally at this point, call the Leader of the Opposition to respond to the Chancellor's statement. As the Speaker announced earlier, the Leader of the Opposition is sadly isolating. We all wish him a speedy recovery, and therefore I call to answer on behalf of the Opposition the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Families struggling with the cost of living crisis, businesses hit by a supply chain crisis, those who rely on our schools and our hospitals and our police. They won't recognise the world that the Chancellor is describing. They will think that he is living in a parallel universe. The Chancellor in this budget has decided to cut taxes for banks. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, at least the bankers on short-haul flights sipping champagne will be cheering this budget today. And the arrogance, after taking £6 billion out of the pockets of some of the poorest people in this country, expecting them to cheer today for £2 billion given to compensate. In the long story of this Parliament, never has a Chancellor asked the British people to pay so much for so little. Time and again today, the Chancellor compared the investments that he is making to the last decade. But who was in charge? Who was in charge in this lost decade? They were. So let's just reflect on the choices that Chancellor has made today. The highest sustained tax burden in peacetime. And who is going to pay for it? It's not international giants like Amazon. No, the Chancellor has found a tax deduction for them. It's not property speculators. They've already pocketed a stamp duty cut. And it's clearly not the banks, even though bankers' bonuses are set to reach a record high this year. Instead, the Chancellor is loading the burden on working people. A national insurance tax rise on working people. A council tax hike on working people. And no support today for working people with VAT on their gas and electricity bills. And what are working people getting in return? A record NHS waiting list with no plan to clear it. No way to see a GP, and still having to sell their home to pay for social care. Community policing, nowhere to be seen. A court backlog leaving victims without justice. And almost every rape going unprosecuted. A growing gap in results and opportunities between children at private and state schools. Soaring number of pupils in supersized classes. And no serious plan to catch up on learning stolen by the virus. £2 billion announced today, a pale imitation of the £15 billion catch-up fund that the Prime Minister's own education czar said was needed. No wonder, Madam Deputy Speaker, that he resigned. Now, the Chancellor talks about world-class public services. Tell that to a pensioner waiting for a hip operation. Tell that to a young woman waiting to go to court to get justice. Tell that to a mum and dad waiting for their child to get the mental health support that they need. And the Chancellor says today that he's realised what a difference early years spending makes. I would just say to the Chancellor, has he ever heard of the Sure Start programme that this Tory government has cut? And why are we in this position? Why are British businesses being stifled by debt while Amazon gets tax deductions? Why are working people being asked to pay more tax and put up with worse services? Why is billions of pounds in taxpayers' money being funnelled to friends and donors of the Conservative Party, while millions of families are having £20 a week taken off of them? Madam Deputy Speaker, why can't Britain do better than this? Now, the government will always blame others. It's businesses' fault. It's the EU's fault. It's the public's fault. They're global problems, The same old excuses. But the blunt reality is this. Working people are being asked to pay more for less for three simple reasons: economic mismanagement, an unfair tax system, and wasteful spending. Absolutely. Each of these problems is down to 11 years of Conservative failure. And they shake their heads, but the cuts to our public services have cut them to the bone. And while the Chancellor and Prime Minister like to pretend that they are different, this budget today will only make things worse. The solution starts with growth. The government is caught in a bind of its own making, because low growth inexorably leads to less money for our public services, unless taxes rise. And under the Conservatives, Britain has become a low-growth economy. Let's look at the last decade. The Tories have grown the economy at just 1.8% a year. If we had grown at the same rate of other advanced economies, we could have had an additional £30 billion to invest in public services without raising the taxes that the Tories are raising on working people today. And let's compare growth under the last 11 years of Conservative government to the last Labour government. Even taking into account the global financial crisis, Labour grew the economy much faster, by 2.3% a year. If the Tories matched that record, we would have £30 billion more a year to spend on public services. It could not be clearer. The Conservatives are now the party of high taxation because the Conservatives are the party of low growth. And the Office for Budget Responsibility confirmed this today, that we will be back to anaemic growth. They might not like this, but the Office of Budget Responsibility said that by the end of this Parliament, the UK economy will be growing by just 1.3%, which is hardly the plan for growth that the Chancellor boasted about today, hardly a ringing endorsement of his announcements. Under the Tory decade, we have had low growth, and there's not much growth to look forward to. Now, the economy has been weakened by the pandemic, but also by the government's mishandling of it. Responding to the virus has been a huge challenge. Governments around the world have taken on more debt, but our situation is worse than in other countries. Worse because our economy was already fragile going into the crisis. Too much inequality, too much insecure work, too little resilience in our public services. And worse, because the Prime Minister dithered and delayed, against scientific advice, egged on by the Chancellor, we ended up facing harsher and longer restrictions than other countries. So as well as having the highest death toll in Europe, Britain suffered the...
Order. We've got to be able to hear the Honourable Lady. Done. Rachel Reeves.
So as well as having the highest death toll in Europe, Britain has suffered the worst economic hit of any major economy. Now, the Chancellor now boasts that we are growing faster than others. But that's because we fell the furthest. And whilst the US and others have already seen their economy bounce back to levels seen before the pandemic, the UK hasn't. Our economy is set to be permanently weaker. On top of all that, the government is now lurching from crisis to crisis. People avoiding journeys because they can't fill up their petrol tank is not good for the economy. People spending less because the cost of the weekly shop has exploded is not good for the economy. And British exporters facing more barriers than their European competitors because of the deal that this government did is not good for our economy. If this were a plan, it would be economic sabotage. And when the Prime Minister isn't blagging that this chaos is part of his cunning plan, he says that he's not worried about inflation. Well, tell that to families struggling with rising gas and electricity bills, with rising prices of petrol at the pump, and with rising food prices. He's out of touch, he's out of ideas, and he's left working people out of pocket. Madam Deputy Speaker, Conservative mismanagement has made the fiscal situation tight. And when times are tight, it's even more important to ensure that taxes are fair, that taxpayers get value for money, but this government fails on both fronts. We have a grossly unfair tax system, with the burden being heaped on working people. Successive budgets now have raised council tax, have raised income tax, and now they have raised national insurance too. But taxes on those with the broadest shoulders, those who earn their income from stocks and shares and dividends and property portfolios, they've been left barely untouched. Businesses based on the high streets are the lifeblood of our communities and often the first venture for entrepreneurs. But despite what the Chancellor has said today, businesses will still be held back by punitive and unfair business rates. The government has failed to tax the online giants and watered down global efforts to create a level playing field. And just when we needed every penny of public money to make a difference, we have a government that is a byword for waste, cronyism and vanity projects. We've had £37 billion for a test and trace system that the spending watchdog says treats taxpayers like an ATM cash machine. A yacht for ministers, a fancy paint job for the Prime Minister's plane, and a TV studio for Conservative Party broadcasts, which seems to have morphed into the world's most expensive home cinema. £3.5 billion of government contracts awarded to friends and donors of the Conservative Party. A £190 million loan to a company employing the Prime Minister's former Chief of Staff. £30 million to the former Health Secretary's pub landlord. And every single one of those cheques signed by the Chancellor. And now he comes to ordinary working people and asks them to pay more. More than they have been ever asked to pay before. And at the same time, to put up with worse public services, all because of his economic mismanagement, his unfair tax system and his wasteful spending. Now, of course, there are some welcome measures in this budget today, as there are in any budget. Labour welcomes the increase in the national minimum wage, that the government needs to go further and faster. If they had backed Labour's position of an immediate rise to at least £10 an hour, then a full-time worker on the national minimum wage would be in line for an extra £1,000 a year. Ending the punitive public sector pay freeze is welcome, but we know how much this Chancellor likes his smoke and mirrors. So we'll be checking the books to make sure that the money is there for a real terms pay rise. Labour also welcomes the government's decision to reduce the universal credit taper rate, as we have consistently called for. But the system has got so out of whack that even after this reduction, working people on universal credit still face a higher marginal tax rate than the Prime Minister. And those unable to work through no fault of their own still face losing over £1,000 a year. And for families who go out to work every day but don't get government benefits, on an average wage, who have to fill up their car with petrol to get to work, who do that weekly shop, and who see their gas and electricity prices go up, this budget today does absolutely nothing for them. We have a cost of living crisis. The government has no coherent plan to help families cope with rising energy prices. And whilst we welcome the action taken today on universal credit, millions will still struggle to pay the bills this winter. The government has done nothing to help people with their gas and electricity bills with that cut in VAT receipts as Labour has called for. A cut that is possible because we are outside the European Union and could be funded by the extra VAT receipts that have been experienced in the last few months. Working people are left out in the cold while the government hammers them with tax rises. Now, national insurance is a regressive tax on working people. It is a tax on jobs. Under the Chancellor's plans, a landlord renting out dozens of properties won't pay a penny more in tax. But their tenants, in work, will face tax rises of hundreds of pounds a year. And he is failing to tackle another huge issue of the day: adapting to climate change. Adapting to climate change presents opportunities. More jobs, lower bills and cleaner air. But only if we act now and if we act at scale. According to the Office for Budget Responsibility, failure to act will mean public sector debt explodes later to nearly 300% of GDP. The only way to be a prudent and responsible Chancellor is to be a green Chancellor, to invest in the transition to a zero-carbon economy and give British businesses a head start in the industries of the future. But with no mention of climate in his conference speech and the most passing of references today, we are burdened with a Chancellor unwilling to meet the scale of the challenges we face. Homeowners are left to face the costs of insulation on their own. Industries like steel and hydrogen are in a global race, but without the support that they need. And the Chancellor today has promoted domestic flights over high-speed rail in the week before COP26. And it is because of this, Chancellor, that in this very week that we try and persuade other countries to reduce their emissions, this government can't even confirm that it will meet its 2035 climate reduction target. Madam Deputy Speaker, everywhere working people look at the moment, they see prices going up and they see shortages on the shelves. But this budget did nothing to address their fears. Household budgets are being stretched thinner than ever. But this budget did nothing to deal with the spiralling cost of living. It is a shocking missed opportunity by a government that is completely out of touch. There is an alternative. Rather than just tweak the system, Labour would scrap business rates and replace it with something much better by ensuring online giants pay their fair share. That's what being pro-business looks like. We wouldn't put up national insurance for working people. We would ensure that those with the broadest shoulders pay their fair share. That's what being on the side of working people looks like. We'd end the £1.7 billion subsidy that the government gives to private schools and put it straight into our local state schools. That's what being on the side of working families looks like. And we deliver a climate investment pledge, £28 billion every year for the rest of this decade. That's gigafactories to build batteries for electric vehicles. That's a thriving hydrogen industry, creating jobs in all parts of our country, and retrofitting so that we keep homes warm and get our energy bills down. That's what real action on climate change looks like. This country deserves better, but they'll never get it under this Chancellor, who gives with one hand but takes so much more with the other. The truth is this. What you get with these two is a classic con game. It's like one of those pickpocketing operations that you see in crowded places. The Prime Minister is the front man, distracting people with his wild promises. All the while, the Chancellor dips his hand in their pockets. It all seems like fun and games until you walk away and find that your purse has been lifted. But people are getting wise to them. Every month they feel the pinch. They're tired of the smoke and mirrors. They're tired of the bluster, of the false dawns, of the promises of jam tomorrow. Labour would put working people first, would use the power of government and the skill of business to ensure that the next generation of quality jobs are created right here in Britain. We'd tax fairly, spend wisely, and after a decade of faltering growth, we'd get the Britain's economy firing on all cylinders. That is what a Labour budget would have done today.
I now call the Chairman of the Treasury Select Committee, Mel Strite.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I rise to broadly welcome this budget. It is the first budget that my right honourable friend has delivered in what we might call the second phase of this crisis, the first having been from the sharp contraction in the size of the economy through to the recovery, during which period my right honourable friend, I think it's fair today, did some
One moment, the honourable gentleman, just one moment. It's too noisy down here now. It's not fair. The honourable gentleman has to be heard too. Mel Stride.
Thank you. I was just saying, Madam Deputy Speaker, that in the first phase of this crisis, between the huge contraction in the size of the economy to the recovery that we're now seeing, I think it's fair to say that my right honourable friend did a pretty remarkable job to support the jobs market and to support jobs. Not without criticism, incidentally, from my committee, but overall a remarkable job. He now has an even tougher job as he looks forward to the future, having to now deliver on sustainable economic growth, making sure that the public finances are on a sustainable trajectory, as well as meeting all those other objectives the government rightly has around levelling up and net zero and so on. I'll give him way briefly to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he mentioned levelling up, and would he not agree that this is a real workers' budget, and actually the funds for skills and schools will transform the prospects of our young people and our adults and let them climb the ladder of opportunity to get skill, security, prosperity and jobs for the future.
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right about skills, and he, of course, through his committee has done so much to promote that agenda, and I will come on to that momentarily. But the background, Madam Deputy Speaker, is extremely tough. Whilst the Chancellor is absolutely right to point out that the deficit is falling, it is nonetheless very highly elevated compared to historic measures. The debt, in financial terms at least, is at a record level of £2.2 billion, and we have the headwinds to the economy of supply chain bottlenecks and the mismatch between demand and supply that we are seeing in parts of the labour force. However, there are reasons to be cheerful, Madam Deputy Speaker. They have been outlined by my right honourable friend, and they are the OBR's revised forecast showing that growth is much stronger this year. I think the Chancellor suggested 6.5 compared to the March forecast of just 4%, and the scarring downgrade from 3% to 2%, which by my calculation is probably worth about 10 billion or thereabouts per year, is a very significant achievement, and all of that has been achieved through the hard work of the last 18 months to 2 years, and I don't think we should take that away from my right honourable friend. It has left him with some breathing space, and he recognises that there are many challenges facing the economy and uncertainties going forward, and I think a big test as we unpack this budget will be what has he done with that additional headroom. And not surprisingly, he has spent quite a lot of it. It appears to me that with his fiscal rules of keeping day-to-day expenditure without borrowing and debt coming down as a percentage of GDP, that I think he has a headroom of about 25 billion in 2024-25 on the net debt target, which is about 0.9% of GDP, with the OBR, I think, in its economic and fiscal outlook, suggesting he has a 55 to 60% chance of hitting that particular metric. What the committee will want to look at very closely is how prudent an approach has my right honourable friend taken to this budget, and I can see my honourable friend itching to intervene, so I will give way to him.
Very briefly, and I am listening intently, but I do believe that the government has done extraordinarily well in raising the national living wage as part of that headroom. It is a major step towards a high-wage, high-tech economy, and also bolsters our one nation agenda, which is to be applauded.
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. I will come to the matter of wages and wage growth momentarily, but just dwelling on this issue of the challenges facing the economy going forward, another thing that the OBR points out is the increased sensitivity, and the Chancellor in fact made this point, to interest rate rises and the damage that it can do to the public finances. And I think my right honourable friend gave the example of a 1% rise leading to £23 billion increase in debt servicing costs. Now, to put that into perspective, Madam Deputy Speaker, that would wipe out the entire value of the corporation tax increases and the threshold freezes for income tax that my right honourable friend announced at the last budget. That would be gone in one enormous gulp. So we do have to be very careful about this vulnerability we have. Though we have low interest rates and interest rates might move up in baby steps, it is applied to a very, very large level of debt indeed. And I wanted to just touch on inflation, and I'm pleased that my right honourable friend spent quite a lot of time on this in his speech. and its impact on interest rates. We've already seen the MPC beginning to divide on the issue as to whether rates should go up, and there's an expectation now, certainly in the markets, that rates will start to increase. We're seeing 10-year gilts coming up in more recent times, and it's possible that QE, maybe passively initially, may start to unwind when we reach a certain trigger level of interest rates as well. So it's very important that this credible plan is there to deliver on those fiscal targets. And the history, Madam Deputy Speaker, is not good in that respect. We have had Chancellor after Chancellor that have failed to meet their fiscal targets. They've either abandoned them completely or delayed them or modified them in some form. And whilst it may be the case, depending on what happens to demand in the economy relative to supply going forward, that there may be a case for fiscal stimulus even further down the line, and one thinks of the removal of the UC uplist, the energy price increases, the labour market demand-supply mismatches and the rising taxes, etc., are often taking demand out of the economy. Nonetheless, that set to one side, the default position of the Chancellor must be to stick to those targets and to resist the huge cacophony of demands that there will be going forward for more and more expenditure, particularly that day-to-day expenditure that he is rightly targeting in his fiscal rules. Now, some of these demands may end up being necessary. If we don't get back to the kind of pattern of demand for public transport that we had before we locked down, it is conceivable that further subsidy will need to go into the public transport sector. There will be other areas, like the health service, that may have additional demands. But I would point out to my right honourable friend, and I know he more than most knows this, that the take of public expenditure taken by the NHS has risen in the last 10 years from 32% to 42% over that period. So he must get very good at saying no to ministers when it's necessary to do so, and to tell them to go back to their departments and work harder at getting more out of what they're given. A lesson for all of us, incidentally, Madam Deputy Speaker, particularly on this side of the House. And if we fail in this endeavour, Madam Deputy Speaker, and inflation takes off and interest rates go up through the roof, and the cost of servicing our debt becomes ruinous, and international markets lose faith in our economy, we will be back broadly where we were in 1992 when we had Black Wednesday. And members on this side of the House will remember the long, hard lesson of that it took us a generation to re-establish our ability to be able to look the electorate in the eye and say we have fiscally a responsible government. There were some announcements on tax, and can I firstly say that I think the drop in the surcharge on the bank surcharge is absolutely the right thing to do. When you're putting corporation tax rates up to 25% from 19%, it would be absurd to cripple our financial institutions with uncompetitive international tax rates. But I was particularly delighted by the shift in the taper rate from 63% to 55%. That is going to help countless low-paid families earn more, keep more of their money, and encourage more people into work. And I remember when I was a Minister at the Treasury, Madam Deputy Speaker, we endlessly looked, and I pushed really hard on this, and I know how expensive, and I think it was £2 billion a year that my right honourable friend suggested, it is to do that. And I take my hat off to him for having grasped that particular nettle. He is right also to set out an aspiration of getting taxes down before the end of this Parliament. It is the same pattern actually as occurred under Lady Thatcher, and there are many references to her when we talk about tax. In the early years of the Thatcher government, the tax burden rose quite strongly, and it was then my right honourable friend's hero, I think, Lord Lawson, who was able to bring those tax rates down. And let's hope that my right honourable friend is in a position to emulate that in due course. Can I just turn briefly to inflation, because I think this is right at the core of what is happening now within the economy. The threat to the public finances through inflation cannot be understated. The big debate now is whether these price surges and increases in inflationary expectations are transitory or they are going to be more persistent. And my right honourable friend referred to the surge in demand relative to supply. And of course, that will lead to price increases. And of course, all else being equal, one might imagine that will pass through relatively quickly. And we've seen commodity price increases, transport price increases, and the energy price increases that my right honourable friend specifically referred to. But there are a number of other price increases that we might expect to be more sticky. The bottlenecks, which are often outside of our control. The Southeast Asian chip manufacturer who has a bottleneck and resulting in us not being able to produce cars here in the United Kingdom. The fact that structurally the labour market has changed, there's a greater demand now for goods relative to services as a consequence of the pandemic, and that will take time to mop up. The Bank of England, the MPC, have expressed increasing concerns in different ways about inflation and have constantly been deferring the moment at which they believe inflation will peak. And I think there is a debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, as to when deferred transitory becomes persistent.
Will you give way?
But can I just finish this point? The huge challenge here and danger is that we go into a wage price spiral. And one of the ways that might happen is if we talk up wages, if we invoke companies to put up wages without a coincident increase in productivity, that will simply feed the inflationary tiger. And we have to be very careful on that point. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Well, would my right honourable friend agree we need to be very careful about believing any of these OBR and Bank of England forecasts? Because they, of course, said that inflation would be down at under 2% just a few months ago, and they've now had to change their mind. And wouldn't you also agree that when Lord Lawson did cut income tax rates, we had a surge of extra revenue?
It's certainly the case that the Bank of England's projections on inflation have been under debate, and in fact the revisions that they've made in more recent times have been more dramatic than those if you go back in time, and that really illustrates my point that I have a feeling that these inflationary pressures are going to be rather more than many imagine them. But if we look at the drivers of inflation, there are some that are outside of my right honourable friend's control, but there are some that are very much within it. And one of those is actually immigration. Now, I totally accept my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister's comment when he says we do not want to instinctively reach for the lever of uncontrolled immigration. He is absolutely right. This country left the EU to get control of our immigration. However, what we mustn't do is avoid pulling the lever that says where in the shorter term there are real genuine pinch points in the labour market, whereby if we don't act and bring skills in if necessary, we will simply encumber those businesses in a way that may mean many of them may go out of business, and we replace them simply with imports, which in themselves can also be inflationary. The other area is skills, and I was really pleased. This comes to the chair of the Treasury, of the Education Select Committee's point, the importance of skills and the announcement that my right honourable friend had to make about post-16 T-levels, lifelong learning. All of those different announcements he made today, I think, are absolutely vital to repurposing the workforce to get the challenges of the future sorted. In the longer term, there's a huge opportunity for us in this country. We are a world leader in life sciences and fintech and financial services, digital sector. We have opportunities in AI and robotics, in genetics. But if we are going to grasp those opportunities, we have to get up the level of business investment. And I think my right honourable friend referred to that increasing through time, which may be true, but it's still quite a long way below where it ought to be, and historically that's the case. So the super deduction, a very important move that the Chancellor has already made, the extension of the annual investment allowance to 2023, very welcome. But I do think we need to look maybe even deeper at how, beyond the point of the end of the super deduction, we continue to see business investment rise. On R&D, it seems to me amongst the plethora of announcements, figures and dates and different schemes and adjustments to reliefs that my right honourable friend identified, it seems to me within that we may have slipped on our target of, by 2024-25, hitting 22 billion. I think that may, if I heard my right honourable friend correctly, has slipped out to 26-27, and I'm not quite sure where we are on the target that we've had before of 2.4% of GDP by 2027. But those are vital targets for us to meet in the longer term. And the final point I would make, Madam Deputy Speaker, is there must be an overarching examination here of this recovery being balanced. Those that were hit hardest by the pandemic have been the poorest in our society. They were much more likely to be impacted by lockdown and a loss of income, and young people. So my committee will be looking very closely at all the issues that I have raised, including the last point that I have made. But can I once again welcome this budget? The Chancellor has been in a very difficult position. I think he's put forward a very positive set of proposals today. The devil will be in the detail. My committee will look forward to examining that detail, including with my right honourable friend, on Monday of next week. Thank you.
I now call the Leader of the Scottish National Party, who will be heard without intervention or interruption. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think we're used to the Prime Minister perhaps being fast and loose with facts, making things up as he goes along, but I have to say I think better of the Chancellor, and I have to gently say to him that if he thinks that he's going to cut air passenger duty for Inverness and the Highlands and Islands, then he's wrong, because there is no air passenger duty in Inverness. And one would have thought if he's going to make announcements, he would have checked his facts before he makes them. But perhaps, Madam Deputy Speaker, more fundamentally, COP26 kicks off this weekend. What on earth are we doing when we're saying to the rest of the world, and the Prime Minister has spoken today about the importance of 1.5%, that we're trying to encourage other companies to step up to the plate to their climate obligations, and the Chancellor wants to cut air passenger duty for domestic flights, and I can see him nodding his head, and increase air passenger duty, admittedly, on long-haul flights. But the fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that CO2 emissions per mile are much higher on domestic flights than they are on long-haul flights. What on earth are we doing? Where are we when we're saying that we take our climate obligations seriously? And by the way, the Scottish Government in 2019, exactly because of our responsibility to climate, took the decision that we were going to remove our planned reduction in air passenger duty. Chancellor, this is a disgrace and shows, quite frankly, that this is not a government that understands the climate challenge that we all face. And the Chancellor should withdraw and remove that proposal. Madam Deputy Speaker, the budget the Chancellor has just delivered is tantamount to grabbing 20 quid out of people's pockets and handing them back a tenner and expecting us to be grateful for it, because today's announcement doesn't even come close to compensating for the tax rises and the cuts that this Chancellor has imposed over the last month. Let's just take our pensioners as an example. With the removal of the triple pensions lock, there will be a £6 billion saving from the government for the raid that they have put on pension tax credit and for the raid that they put on pensioners. That's the harsh reality of what happens with this Tory government. The raw reality of that fiscal trickery means that millions of families and workers will be worse off this winter. This is a budget that brazenly cuts taxes for the banks, whilst at the same time cuts universal credit for the poor. Now, we welcome the changes to the taper relief, but it doesn't change the fundamental fact that everybody on universal credit has just lost £1,000. The Chancellor, who once promised to do whatever it takes, is now a very distant memory. The true test of this budget was whether it would radically act and tackle the cost of living crisis, the Brexit crisis and the climate crisis. Madam Deputy Speaker, it has failed that test on all three fronts. Instead of doing whatever it takes, the Chancellor has done as little as possible. And the Tories' half-hearted rhetoric about fairness has predictably only produced half measures when it comes to soaring household bills and the crippling cost of inflation. Perhaps worst of all, before the Chancellor stood up today, millions in poverty knew that they were facing the choice between heating and eating this winter. And the ultimate failure of this budget is that when the Chancellor sat down, those millions of people are still left with that terrible choice. Madam Deputy Speaker, once the full details of today's announcement sink in, I think that the Tory cheers for their Chancellor will quickly fall silent. Indeed. And we can already sense that discontent growing from government backbenchers in the red wall seats. Because another hidden truth of this budget is that it only promises capital spending tomorrow, but delivers austerity today. The Chancellor is living in the naive hope that the public will somehow have forgotten what his government have hit them with over the last few weeks. Yep. He came in today and bragged about his government's generosity. But for the last month, his government have hammered working people and ordinary families with regressive national insurance tax rises, the premature end of furlough, and worst of all, that disgraceful £1,000 cut to universal credit. I'm sorry to break it to the Chancellor, but the public have far from forgotten. They know that the political choices this government has made, and they know the choices that have made them poorer. They know that they have been badly hit in the pocket by this government, and today goes nowhere near to making it up. They know too that the rise in the minimum wage is welcome. But I say to the Chancellor that the Living Wage Foundation will update the real living wage on the 15th of November this year. That will reflect what is happening, and perhaps the Chancellor and the Secretary of State for Scotland might listen, because actually this is important, because this is about the poorest. This is about people in poverty. And I'm asking the Chancellor to recognise the Living Wage Foundation's announcement on the 15th of November of the real living costs of the poorest in society. And whilst I welcome today's announcement to £9.50, give a commitment that will be rise to the real living wage this year, because that fundamentally is what will keep people out of poverty. Because we know that a full-time worker on a minimum wage this year will still be hundreds of pounds worse off because of the cuts to universal credit. The smoke and mirrors about rising wages just doesn't cut it. The Chancellor might want folk to think he's giving with his left hand, but in reality he's taking much more out of their pockets with his right hand. But nobody's fooled. The only people living in their own parallel universe are the neighbours in number 10 and number 11 Downing Street. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the real world, people are struggling with a Tory cost of living crisis that this budget fails to fix. Indeed. Under the leadership of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, the public are being hit with an energy crisis, a Brexit crisis, a labour crisis, an inflation crisis, and it all adds up to a Tory cost of living crisis that is punishing workers and punishing families. It is a deeply damaging pattern that has become all too familiar. What we are experiencing is a United Kingdom in constant crisis, and it's very little wonder that Scotland wants out. More and more people. Well, you know, they are predictable. I hear from a sedentary position the Secretary of State for Scotland, or at least that's what I think his job title is. Who doesn't have a mask on? Who doesn't have a mask on, despite the fact that members of this House are falling ill with COVID. But the simple fact of the matter, I would say to the Prime Minister and I would say to the Secretary of State of Scotland, that all of us have to recognise democracy. And the Conservatives have to recognise that there was an election to the Scottish Parliament that took place this year. There's a majority for independence in that Parliament, and that Parliament will bring forward a referendum bill. And it ill beholds those that lost the election in Scotland, the Conservatives who've lost every election since 1955. To deny the right of the people of Scotland to their own sovereign will, to their own sovereign decision, to have a referendum on our future, offering us the hope that is failing from this Tory budget today. Keep going. More and more people are coming to the view that independence now offers safety and stability, an escape from the constant crisis of Westminster control. They are coming to the view that we can simply no longer afford to pay the price of being part of this failing union. Madam Deputy Speaker, the defining decision of this budget is the failure to fully reverse the cuts to universal credit, tapering the rate is only tinkering around the edges of the problem.
Correct.
The decision was fully wrong, and it needs to be fully reversed.
Hear, hear.
Because not alone was the cut to universal credit the wrong policy, it came at the worst possible time. It was a decision that was callous. It was a decision that was made before the rapid rise in inflation was truly known. But instead of having the strength to admit that they are wrong, the Tories have decided to dig their heels in. Earlier this week, the Chancellor, in many of his pre-budget announcements, said that this budget was a chance for him and his government to get back to, and I quote, a more normal way of doing things. So it's very telling that in the same budget he has confirmed that the disgraceful cut to universal credit, he is cutting the surcharge on banks from 8 to 3%. So back to normal for this Chancellor clearly means one thing. It means that the mindless mantra of the Tory long-term economic plan, it means austerity for the many and tax cuts for the few. That is a very simple way for the Tories to prove me wrong. Do the right thing and reverse the cut to universal credit and put the £1,000 back into the pockets of those that desperately need it. And while they are at it, Madam Deputy Speaker, remove the benefit cap, the two-child limit, the rate clause, the sanctions regime, the 5-week wait, and finally, introduce statutory sick pay at the real living wage. As well as introducing these permanent measures, specifically and targeted measures are needed to help with energy prices for the winter ahead. That is particularly true for the 2 million pensioners in poverty, those that have been let down by the removal of the triple lock. We believe that the fairest way to help is to introduce an emergency energy payment to cover families who simply can't afford the soaring costs of the price of heating and electricity bill. That would be, at the very least, the best way to protect people this winter. Madam Deputy Speaker, I suspect that inflation will not be alone to have been the pressing issue of this budget. I fear it may well be the defining issue of many budgets to come. The Bank of England's new chief economist has warned that inflation could soon hit 5%. Mortgage holders are rightly fearful that this inflationary spike will be met with a rise in interest rates. The Chancellor seems to think that all of this is merely transitory, but complacency on this issue is simply not an option. History shows how quickly an inflationary spiral can get out of control. It is worth remembering that in 1980, inflation hit 18%. None of us can afford to go back to that place. Madam Deputy Speaker, the inflationary threat is just one element of what amounts to the perfect storm of economic vulnerability. The COVID crisis can no longer camouflage the deep damage that Brexit has done. And the single biggest threat to our recovery was being dragged out of the European Union, against the wishes of those that live in Scotland. And the consequences of Brexit are here, and they're hurting. Our exports, down 14% year on year. Our fishermen, blatantly betrayed. Our farmers, sold out in fire sale UK trade deals. Labour shortages, food shortages, medical shortages. It can't be said often enough that Scotland is paying the price for a policy that we never supported. Brexit has already cost billions. But whilst the European Union is giving Ireland €1.05 billion to mitigate the damage of Brexit, Scotland is yet to receive a single penny of compensation from Westminster.
Correct.
So I would like to ask the Chancellor, where is the same £1 billion package of support for struggling businesses that have been hit by Brexit? And I know that the opposition benches don't like to hear this, but what these businesses also need is a return to freedom of movement. They need the 1% hike to employer and employee national insurance halted, and their hospitality and tourism sector needs the 12.5% VAT rate to be made permanent. All of these businesses badly need a break from Brexit. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we know, this budget comes at a matter of days from COP26. Keeping the target of 1.5 degrees alive depends on government commitment to embrace the green economy. And let's be honest, this budget today, as I've already outlined, does not help. The fact that this crucial conference is happening in Glasgow is a chance to show moral leadership. But it's also an opportunity to grasp the opportunities that the green economy can provide. Moving to a just transition from oil and gas is essential to capture the economic opportunities of the new energy technologies and support people into new jobs. It obviously hasn't hit home on the government benches of the depth of anger felt in the north east of Scotland because of the decision to renege on their previous promises to make sure that we have carbon capture and storage in Scotland. If this Chancellor was, and perhaps, Chancellor, this is really, really important, because this is about our ability to get to net zero, and it's about the fact that we know that the Treasury has blocked carbon capture storage in Scotland. And I'm saying directly to the Chancellor, and perhaps he will meet me then over the coming days, to make sure that the Scottish Acorn project is put back on track and that we increase the number of carbon capture and storage projects from 2 to 3 for the very simple reason that we need this. We need this in order to deliver on our net zero targets, and we need this to deliver 15,000 jobs in Scotland for that just transition. And I'm saying to the government directly, let's make sure that we give her some hope to the north east of Scotland. £350 billion of tax revenues has been taken out of the North Sea. We need a helping hand to deliver that just transition. And I need the Secretary of State for Scotland to stand up for us, to stand up for Scotland, to make sure that we get that just transition. And if this Chancellor was serious about supporting Scotland, he would have stood up today and announced that the Scottish cluster will go ahead. Because the reality, Madam Deputy Speaker, it was a purely political choice to deny that Scotland should get carbon capture and storage. And what on earth? What on earth is the Secretary of State for Scotland doing? Sitting in his hands, failing once again to stand up for Scotland's interest. Hee-haw, I hear from the SNP benches. Maybe he's the Secretary of State for hee-haw. And it isn't only carbon capture for this government is holding back our renewable opportunities. I am passionate about the potential of tidal stream, but the contract for difference budget of this UK government means that there is currently no route to the domestic market for this industry. Despite the Prime Minister's warm words in response to my questions last week, there is no ring-fenced £71 million budget for tidal energy stream, a small pot of money that could kick-start the opportunities in this industry and prevent it from being lost overseas. Let's be real about this. And I really have to say to the Chancellor, it really is important that he listens to this debate. It's his debate. Because we are serious about the opportunities. We're serious about the opportunities that there are. You can point to the clock all you like, but we're talking about the future of the renewable energy industries in Scotland and paying attention to what industry is saying, because we know with the breakthroughs in technology that we have, we know that the Royal Society has painted a picture of an industry that could represent 20% of our electricity needs throughout the United Kingdom. But it needs to be kick-started, and it needs to be kick-started with financial support. And it's the UK government, when we're all talking about our responsibilities to net zero, that are standing with the foot on the brake for this industry to get off the ground and deliver not just for people in Scotland, but right across the United Kingdom. And of course, there is no commitment to match the Scottish Government's £500 million investment for a just transition in the north east of Scotland. Now that the Chancellor has blown up the idea of a Boris Bridge across the Irish Sea, he should, after all, have plenty of spare money to invest. And on that point, can I ask the Chancellor will the estimated cost of £20 billion for the cancelled bridge now be ring-fenced for future transport projects in Scotland and Northern Ireland? Just one more promise that will be broken, just one more example of Westminster holding back Scotland's green future. Madam Deputy Speaker, this budget could have been an opportunity to do things differently, to get a grip on the cost of living crisis and to kick-start a fair recovery. But this budget doesn't signal recovery. It signals that the Chancellor is dragging us into another winter of discontent. But I can assure the House that Scotland has been discontent with Westminster control for more winters than one. Our country hasn't voted for a Tory economic plan since 1955. Westminster's choices are not our choices. The last thing that Scotland needs is another winter of discontent imposed by another Tory government. Ultimately, we know that democracy is the only cure and the only solution to that deep discontent. That is why, when the crisis of the pandemic has passed, Scotland's people will have the right to choose their own future, an independent future. It is a manifesto promise we made. It is a democratic promise that we will keep. And I look forward to the judgment of the people of Scotland. I look forward to a future that is fair, that is green, that is European. Madam Deputy Speaker, I look forward to an independent Scotland.
Call the Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman was saying thank you for the extra £4.5 billion which will come to Scotland as a consequence of the budget. I think he's probably saying thank you for the 8 allocations of UK-wide growth funds, the bids in Scotland between Aberdeen and Glasgow. And when he talks about the support for the SNP, his party, in the polls, if his memory goes back to June 2017, the SNP in Scotland got less than 37% of the